Hello, my name is David Bryan, and this is Curiosity Invited, a podcast inspired by endless curiosity. Tune in for an open-minded conversation about interesting and important things. How about now? Is that better?
Yes.
Good.
I think you might have to say the introduction, David, no? Because it's your podcast.
Well, sort of.
Yeah, I think you have to start it.
Okay.
And then I'll take it from there.
Fair enough. So, you're going to clap?
Oh.
Okay. Well, so welcome to Curiosity Invited, and I'm David Bryan, but I'm not the person to pay attention to today. That person is on screen is Katalin Hanappi. Did I say it right? Hanappi.
You're getting better every time, David.
Who you may have seen the conversation she and I had about her, and we thought it might be fun to turn the tables and put the microphones and cameras on the opposite person, sort of. And so she's going to speak with me, interview me, whatever that means. So take it away, huh, Katalin?
Yes. So this started a little bit as we were joking around. I said, there's going to be a revenge. I will interview you. And then here we are. Because I think it's a good idea that everybody listening to Curiosity Invited actually gets to learn a little bit about the host, who is the most amazing David Bryan.
I'll send you that $5. I promise.
Yeah,
if
good.
You say that.
Good.
Yeah.
Make it 10.
Okay. Good.
So you're so used to ask questions, but well, today we're gonna flip the coin a little bit. Good. And I want to read your bio first to sum up your incredible life into just a few lines. It's pretty difficult, but I'm gonna read it out. So this is David Bryan. Through a decades-long career in the trade, business, and education spaces, Dr. David Bryan has garnered the skills to be a curious and eager student of many fields. Having taught at middle school, high school, and university levels throughout the United States, David Bryan gained the experience to spearhead his own venture, co-founding the New Road School, a unique independent school in Southern California. This is where we met, actually. I used to be a student of yours there. Mm-hmm. At New Roads, David served as a faculty member, founding head of school and president from 1995 until his departure in 2013. Following this, he founded his own consulting business, lectured on economics at the University of California at Santa Cruz, and was also the inaugural director of the Center for the Common Good, a joint venture of the Herb Alpert Foundation and New Roads School. He serves as a director on the board of Motor Car Parts of America and is currently the chair of the board of the Ojai Foundation and the chair of the board governance committee at Brave New Films. David received a BA from the State University of New York at Stony Brook, an MS from the University of California at Los Angeles, a JD and PhD from the State University of New York at Buffalo. Gosh, you're a busy man, David.
I can't believe I did all that.
Yeah. A few years ago, David relocated to rural Wyoming, and despite his love for the community, it was the first time in years that he found himself outside of the classroom. At the same time, the podcasting world has been steadily growing, allowing people all over the world to connect and create synergy. Thus leveraging the podcasting format and fortified by his enduring belief that, quote, a person can learn a great deal about the world and other people by simply being curious about what folks do. David has launched his largest classroom yet, the Curiosity Invited podcast. And here we are.
Here we are.
Here we are.
You look so bright and shiny.
Yes.
Did you change your camera? Are you using an actual camera this time?
No, I didn't. No.
Wow.
It's the same old laptop.
Wow. You're crystal clear here.
Good. So David, tell me about Curiosity Invited. I want to know, when and why did you start it?
Let's see. When was in January, late January of this year, 2022. And why? That's a good question. I think it's some combination of sort of missing having lots of conversations with people, which I did a lot when I was around a lot of people I knew in Los Angeles, and then later on in Santa Cruz area in California. So it was there was that missing, and then I started watching podcasts and discovered that uh, people would talk about watching podcasts or listening to podcasts or whatever, and it seemed like, well, why would I want to just do that? I'm already plugged in. I sort of, between TV and movies and whatever, it's I'm saturated with media. So why would I want another one? And I don't know. It was probably one early morning when I woke up at 3 o'clock, and and I don't know, something came up. It may have been Joe Rogan or something, and I don't know Joe Rogan from anybody. I mean, I'd probably heard the name. He had a big podcast, and he was just having a conversation with people, and so I sort of started digging, not just in his stuff, but how the feed on YouTube comes up. And I was like, oh, there's there's actually a lot of, I'm sure there's a lot of crap, but there's a lot of worthwhile things up there that might be fun. And so I did. I asked a few people I know, Herb Alpert, who you don't know, but we all know. All people of my age certainly know. Herb Alpert, from Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, who I knew through the school, and then the co-founder of the school with me, Paul Cummins, and then the current head of school at New Roads, if they wanted to talk about the school, just that. And I wasn't thinking about a podcast or anything like it. And I don't know if it was any good or anything, but it was fun. And I trust fun. Obviously, not all fun is created equal, but I thought, wow, I could do more of that, and there it was. And it's proven, well, it's still great fun, um, and you get to have conversations with people and um, and discover what sort of makes them interesting and fabulous or crazy or close-minded, and and all of those things. So I'm having a ball. I mean, it's pretty great. It's pretty great. But it really came from geez, that might be fun. And here it is. Turns out I was right.
Yeah.
And I got to have now this is the third conversation we've had. Once on the podcast, and once just reconnecting, having not spoken to each other in 24 years.
Yeah, it's been 24 years. I was 12 when we met. That's 24 years later.
Yeah, amazing.
And I remember you exactly like this, even 24 years ago. And this is something that I want to talk to you about later. But I wanted to ask. Are you a conversationist? Are you the kind of person that whoever he meets, he just kind of finds the essence of them, or
Uh, I can speak with just about anyone.
yeah,
But that's only once I'm speaking. I'm actually, this is really true. You're not going to believe it. I'm actually painfully shy. I really am a very shy person, and I've always been a shy person. So the act of sort of getting into a conversation is rare, but which is one of the reasons why it's kind of great to have this calling card, right? I do this podcast and like, so it can start a conversation, but I don't, I just, I'm one of those people who like, if I go to a party, I'm the person who's like staring at the wall. That's a really interesting piece of art. And I'm not paying attention to the art at all. So I've always been super shy.
Really, you wouldn't notice. I mean, when did you start to hide that you were shy? When did you? Because you wouldn't seem like that. You don't
Right.
seem closed up or anything. You
Yeah.
seem very open. And so, why did you hide it, and when?
Um, I think the thing that when I had to, I found myself for a variety of reasons. Like for instance, I didn't want to pay for graduate school when I went to graduate school. So it's like, well, how can I get support? They said, well, you can teach a class. I was like, okay. Well, my mind was on, okay, well, they're going to pay my tuition. So I'll do this. And then came the first day of class when I realized, oh my God, I actually have to do this. And, it wasn't the content of the class that was problematic, but it was like I had to stand up in front of a room. I mean, I was so shy that when I was in college, if I was, could have signed up for a class, and if on the first day of class they said, well, any sort of oral presentation was required, I dropped the class and switched to something else. But having to, right here, I am in front of a classroom, and went well. I cracked a joke, and they laughed, and it was like, oh, that's kind of good. Um, and then when I was running the school, at the first admissions open house, like the school hadn't started, people were showing up that we were trying to sort of entice to come to the school. And, the room gets quiet, and suddenly it's like, oh yeah, I have to do this. So the role helped a lot. But truth is, if I go someplace and I'm by myself, I'm pretty quiet and to myself to this day. I mean, I don't mind once I get into a conversation. It's great. Because I really am curious about about people, but it does not come naturally to be in conversation.
You think?
Some people are so good at that. I suspect you are.
Oh, I'm shy. I have a very shy side, and I wonder. Do you think it's maybe connected with you being a good listener and like being a bit of an observer also because you have a loud internal
Yeah,
voice, I suppose.
yeah.
And
That's possible. I look back at my time as a child, and um, I had a lot of ridicule when I was a child, mostly because a lot of people making fun of me because I was fat, but I was I was actually quite fat, quite heavy, and 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 people really did. People were relentless, you know. You know how that is. So I think that was sort of walking around embarrassed, not necessarily seeing what they're seeing, because I would look in the mirror. I was like, I didn't know I was fat. Like, really? Um, uh, but being the brunt of that, you kind of learn to hide. So so
but then, so what kind of child were you? What did you do? What excited you as a child?
I think I was pretty normal. I like to play. I like to ride my bicycle. I like to play sports. I like to play all those kinds of things. Um, uh, I definitely was a listener. I like to watch people. I think some of that came from the times. The I don't know what it's like. You grew up in Austria. Well, you grew up everywhere, but back in the 50s and the early 60s in the United States, that there were no such thing. Never heard the word till I was an adult. There were no such thing as play dates. It's like you went with your parents when they did things, you did things. So if they went and visited friends, you came along. And if the friends had kids, well, you played with the kids. But if they didn't, you sat and listened to the adults. And you learned a lot of stuff listening. So so I was always that. I was always that. But I was, I don't think you could pick me out of a crowd except, oh, the fat kid. but 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 in terms of being peculiar or having some sort of peculiar interest or anything like that, I think I was pretty normal. It's like, you just want people to like you, and you want people to want to be friends with you. And so
But you must have, I mean, I believe that the 60s and late 60s must have been an incredible time.
yeah.
In an age where you can already witness what's going on, the music, the artists. How old were you?
Yeah.
How old were you in your teens? In the
In the
late
60s? In the 60s, yes. Yeah. I was born in 1952,
Mhm.
which makes me 70 if anybody's counting.
Which is
Um,
unbelievable looking at you. We'll
really?
talk
That is
later.
exactly the reaction I'm going for. So good. Um, uh,
That's another 20.
yes, right.
No, but really, how do you remember the 60s? So how old were you, say, in the famous 68? Perhaps you
68.
remember
There it
how
is.
you
I was 16. I was 16,
unbelievable.
17, right? So, and it was the thick of it. You know, between the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War protests, um, it was it was a time of both upheaval and excitement, and you really did feel like the world was changing. And I think, I mean, I was a quote aware of the world, but only in the ways you can get from like the headlines of the news, right? So I remember I remember the Kennedy Nixon election. It was the first election. I was to say I was paying attention. I wasn't really paying attention. Um, you were just listening to what was said and had some story about. I don't think I even knew what a senator was. Um, right. So, but and I probably thought, well, Nixon should be elected because he's already been the vice president, so he's had practice. So, I mean, just a really kind of clunky, uh, unschooled, uninformed sense about the world. But I remember the the conversation, and being surprised by lots of it. Um, the There was this sense that, well, this country will never. I remember people saying it. This country will never elect a Catholic for president. Up until that point, all the presidents had been Protestant of one sort or another. So they'll never. And I thought, geez, I knew people had problems with Jewish people because I knew about the Holocaust, and I am Jewish. I knew about the Holocaust, and I knew about my family coming over, my grandparents, and all of those things. And I had already had some experiences, people having trouble with somebody being Jewish, but I thought, Catholic, people have trouble with Catholics too. That's weird. Um, and then just that, sort of as the little sprout is kind of emerging from the earth, and it's sort of waking up to that it's in the world. I think that's what it was like for me. And then the world exploded, right? I mean, there was the Vietnam War, there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, which you kind of, I mean, you go for these drills and everybody goes into the basement of the school because they might drop a nuclear bomb. I mean, it was that sort of stuff. The Russians and the United States and a nuclear war and yada yada yada. And then and then the South erupted, and the bus protest, right, rose, and the students sitting at the lunch counter where they were not allowed, and just marches and marches, and Martin Luther King, and and kids at college, which I didn't quite know what college was for, but I knew it was something you were supposed to do. But college was, they were protesting at college against this war, which I didn't really understand. And and then kids got shot, and hippies, and I think we spoke about this very briefly, maybe not. I lived at a time when hair was really meaningful.
Yeah, we
It was
did
like,
talk about
you did, right? It was like, I think about that now. It's like the length of somebody's hair was meaningful in just this variety of different ways. And if you were long, if your hair was long, and long could be just over your ears, you could get kicked out of school, you could get detention, you could get kicked off a team, you could get your parents could yell at you, it's time for a haircut, David. It's time you get a hair. Like, but I like it. I like my sideburns, and I like, and, so it was a wacky time, and eye-opening, right? It really was, the expression that became associated with the music and the drugs and it was a mind-blowing time. And it really was. It was the explosion into awareness of so many different things, and so many different, well, it seemed like so many different options, only to discover years later that there were even more options, right? That people made so many different choices about their lives and with their lives and what to do, and there were so many different avenues available, things to care about, and things to be upset about, or things to embrace, or things to want more of, flourishing in the world. So it was amazing. I mean, and I think it doesn't get a lot of credit these days. That the 60s was just a lot of upheaval and a lot of protests, but it really didn't do anything or do much. And I actually don't think that's true. I think you could even see it in the times, right? I mean, like, for instance, during the war in Vietnam, every once in a while, you sort of see a rally going on, and there'd be like 10 people, 25 people, maybe 50 people. That was a lot. And there was a war going. It was a war. And then I remember Ronald Reagan was president, and there was some throwaway, like, flippant suggestion about the invasion of Nicaragua at the time. And the next day, just the suggestion of it, the next day, 20,000 people showed up in front of the federal building to protest the possibility. So that, I see that as a direct link to, like, what the world discovered then in a big way in media was, well, if people got together and made their voices heard, a lot of things can happen. Maybe not everything you want, but a lot of things can happen. So I think it was a super important time historically, and a super important time for a young person to be growing up. But it really was like my eyes were open, and as were my my critical thoughts, because I discovered that I discovered I was kind of a pain in the ass. I didn't agree with, I never found a side that I agreed with completely. I was like, well, I don't feel this way, but that person should have the right to feel that way and think those things. And so I didn't want to shut them up completely. It's one of the things that I I'm troubled by these days. I don't know how much it goes on where you are, but when I started to hear about people 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 who were invited to speak at colleges or someplace to give lectures, and I mean, unless they were well, it was interesting, when I went to law school and learned that there's a case in constitutional law, free speech case, goes by the name the Skokie case, Skokie, Illinois. And now I'm going to have to remember the facts, but the American Nazi Party wanted to march with their banners and their slogans and their whatever down the streets of Skokie, Illinois, which was as I understand it, a heavily Jewish or largely Jewish neighborhood in the suburbs around Chicago. And how can this be? Who could let them? And of course, the Supreme Court said, no, they should have the right to protest. There's which was also an eye opener for me, a Jewish kid who, so here were the Nazis with a right to speak. And then I started hearing about, well, wait, these people can't speak on a college campus. They've been invited by some group from the college, and they're certainly not Nazis, but they're getting shouted down. And it's so that's, I don't know how I got there, but I discovered way back when that just because I don't agree with somebody, or just because I do agree with somebody, I don't agree with everything about them and everything they think. And I don't disagree with everything that somebody I mostly don't like thinks, but they're not necessarily stupid. They have a point. They have a point of view. It may not be my point of view, and it may be, it may actually be something that, geez, I mean, it's not, if it's not harmful, right? If it's not really hurting anybody, then shouldn't that person be able to have that point of view? And and more that's feels like that's less and less tolerated.
Yes,
having
it's
different points
very
of view.
strong.
And
It's
is that
very
happening?
strong.
Is that happening where you are in the
Yes,
world?
very much. Just black, white. It's happening. It happened with Corona. It happened with the question of getting vaccinated or not. It happened
Yeah.
with Austria, where I am, is very close to Ukraine. It's only 500 kilometers from Ukraine. Even the question of should we take up refugees in our houses or not? Anything. There's point of views that are so strong and so dividing that there is no place at all for any other opinion.
Yeah.
And it's getting very strong. I notice it a lot on social media.
Yeah. Crazy on
And
social media.
the thing that it's a lack of tolerance, I feel. Sometimes it feels like not having a strong opinion seems to be weak, seems to be a weak thing, because
Yeah.
but then it's not. You're just being tolerant, right? It's leaving
Yes.
space for every opinion.
Right.
But then at the same time, I mean, you were a headmaster, so and in many other positions that you had, where you have to have a little bit of the eagle eye, the eagle view on things, right? So you have to look at everything that's going on, but at the same time, you sometimes have to make decisions and lead into a direction. How is that for you as a very tolerant person? How is it with decision making and being a leader?
I used to say around the school, I would tell people when, especially around issues like, and people would sort of come with the equivalent of their hands pounding on the desk, their fist pounding on the desk. Well, you might, and I would say humor helps, by the way. Humor always helped. Um, but the Lord answers all prayers. Most of the time the answer is no. so so but it you know I think there are times when especially people in any sort of leadership role, but I suspect that's true for everybody. There are times when you just have to make a decision. You have to make a decision. You have to point to a direction, or you have to decide something that's going to piss somebody off. And it is. But there are frequently ways to not everything was just as we were speaking, not everything is black and white. And schools, I think schools, well, they ought to. I was about to say they have an advantage, but I'm not sure that's true. But they ought to have an advantage, which is there are young people there, people who, are at the point where they are making up their minds about things, or they're trying different hats on, right? What does it feel like to be this, and what does it feel like to be that, and trying to shove things down, well, probably anybody's throat, but certainly young people's throats is, the worst way the worst way to get them to discover anything except that you're the asshole who made me, do this thing that I didn't want to do. But also just the worst way to get them to actually think about something and change their minds, perhaps, right? See that somebody else has a point. Hey, I hadn't thought about it that way. So at least in my role at school, I was inclined towards not shoving things down. If there were, look, you couldn't write the N word on the bathroom wall, right? I mean, it's just because it's your speech. Right? There's certain places where it's just like, no, you don't get to do this. You can do that. Actually, you do get to do this, just not here. Right? My job is to decide where the guardrails go on the road, and I keep them kind of flexible. I'm open to hearing different things, but at some point you reach the edge, and then it's okay. Congratulations, you found the edge. Now back up or go. So, right. I mean, I think kids appreciate it. The community appreciates that, but uh, you know, and look, there are schools and there are people who had the role I had who did it a very different way, right? They held the reins really tight. They wanted a certain sort of, well, they would call it standard, and it was inflexible. And I see the wisdom of that out here, way out here. But and obviously people disagree with this, but from my point of view, the best way for people to be is free within limits. And so even if it's not the way I would prefer somebody be, I want to give people space to bounce into things and try things and discover, geez, there was I'm trying to remember where I heard it. It might have been a Buddhist monk that I interviewed, who, for all sorts of reasons, I couldn't put his interview up, but I hope someday to be able to do it. But when a snake, what was it he said? When a snake, if you put a snake into a bamboo reed, like a stick of bamboo that's hollow, right? It discovers, right, that it's not the way a snake wants to be to get through this thing. But one of the things the snake discovers in there is that it moves like this. It moves that way. So without those restrictions, or restrictions at some point teach people what they like, what they don't like, what they how they enjoy themselves, how they want to, the kinds of ideas that make sense to them, etc. And again, a lot of people would much rather have the world be black and white in exactly the ways they want. But most things, or at least many things, um, there are a lot of different colors in this world, and not just black, white, and gray. Like, look, there's orange right behind you, and you like both that drawing of the bridge, which is black and white,
Yes.
and the orange, and there they are, and they're fine. And but if you just lived in a world with a black and white and you had to choose, okay, which one is it? Like, what kind of world is that? I mean, it's a world, but it's not a technicolor world and it's not a world where human beings live. And I think, sadly, that's increasingly the world we are trying to make. We people are trying to make. I want to be around people who think just like me. I want to listen to the things that people say that I agree with. I want to play the games and watch the games that I like and not those other things. And, it's so limiting and so cloistering and so ultimately, we end up in this kind of, like we are increasingly now, in this tribal situation where the other tribe is obviously suspicious and obviously dangerous and obviously something we want to get rid of. And we certainly don't want them over here. I think I told you, when you drive, so I live in Wyoming, and when you drive into a neighboring town there's a big billboard, big, and it says, "Don't California our Cody," which is, don't bring those things here. It's not clear what those things are, but I think it might be things like tolerance. So yeah, and that's a freaky, weird thing that, had you asked me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if the world was going to head in that direction, it's like, are you kidding? This is a world where now gay marriage is allowed. I mean, it's like, that's, if you had asked me if that would ever happen, like, no, there's so much intolerance for it. How could that possibly happen? And now look, and we see the reaction, right? Increasingly. So it's, it's pretty exciting. I sure hope I'm around long enough to see how it all turns out.
Well, curiosity helps, right? Curiosity is like the
Yeah.
entryway to every opinion.
Yeah, exactly. So
you've had so much to do with education. When did that start? How was your education as a child? Did so many terrible things happen that you decided to change the way young people are educated?
That's interesting.
When was that moment?
So I went to public schools, and when I graduated from high school, there were probably close to 4,000 students in my school, probably 1,000 in my graduating class. It was pretty insane. It was large. And as far as I could tell, I'd gotten a good education, an education that, I don't know, like, how I couldn't compare it with anything. It was my education. I think I turned out later that I'm not so sure. I don't think it was a bad education, but there were so many other possibilities I just didn't know about. And then went off to college, and it was a large public university, State University of New York at Stony Brook. And so all of my education had been in public environments, right? Public public elementary school, middle school, junior high school, college, graduate school, all big public universities. And 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 then I ran away, and I ran away from Buffalo, New York, and bought a boat with a friend of mine, and lived on a boat, and lived on boats, and worked on boats for the next 3 or 4 years. And I didn't know anything about boats, but I learned a lot. And interesting, actually, hadn't thought about this. So I learned how to work on large diesel engines that were in boats, and I did that by looking at them. So every morning, as part of my sort of morning ritual, I would open up the door to the engine room and sit there and look at this thing. And over time, sort of, it's at first it looked like like a plate of spaghetti with things going everywhere. Like, and over time, you kind of get used to this goes to that and that goes to that. And then one day I was bold enough to like, okay, I'm going to take this off. I think this is the heat exchanger. I had heard the word, I think it is. So I took it off, and then I put it back on and started up the engine, and it worked. Oh, okay, I did that. And so over time, I learned how to work on boats.
Do you learn like that? Sorry. Do you learn like that? Do you look at things? Is that how you learn? Or you have to do them to learn?
Yes, I think both. I think both. I think there's really, you can get a lot of speculation from looking at things, and speculating is good. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're not. so and asking people questions and etc. But at some point I was like, okay, I'm kind of done working on people's boats. I mean, that was my work. I started a small business where I was, working on other people's boats in the marina, because there's a lot of boats. Well, I was out of graduate school by then. I had run away. This was from Buffalo. So Buffalo, I had already had my law degree and my PhD. And it was like, I didn't want to become a lawyer. I don't think I had the temperament for it at the time. But and in Buffalo was cold. So I ran away to South Florida where it was warm. And long story short, I was done with being on, and boats, can be, unless you're living on a large boat, boats can be real. Yeah, as boats can be uncomfortable.
You bump your head. It's tiny. It's
There's no such thing as a short project on a boat. Oh, I'm just going to whatever it is. The anchor light is out. I'm just going to change the anchor light. Oh my gosh, you got to get the tools out, and you got to take everything apart to get to one thing. And so at some point, I was like, okay, I'm done. But what's next? And I think I told you the story, but I'm not sure. So there I am. I came home from a day of work. Came home meant I walked from one side of the marina to the other, and it was my habit back then. I'd sit in the cockpit of my boat, and I loved the experience of like listening to the ropes as they clanged on the mast, and just that gentle sway, and the sun's going down. And I had at the time I was drinking a little amaretto. So it's like an almond liqueur with an ice cube. And I would smoke one cigarette a day. And so I lit up my cigarette and sitting there and listening to the sounds and thinking to myself, so if I wasn't going to be doing this, well, like what's next? What's next? And I didn't know, I really, I didn't have any. And I went, I my glass was empty. So I got up to go down below to get a little more amaretto. And as I got down below, someone said, well, you could always be a high school teacher. And the
Who
two
was the
things,
someone? Who was the someone?
yeah, that's actually the problem. That's the puzzle right there. Exactly. So the two things about that was, first was like, high school teacher? What? I have no, like, what? And the other thing was, I was the only person on the boat. There was no someone else. And I actually was scared. I remember turning around like and thinking, what the hell, who is that? And, but it was absolutely a voice. And so I poured my glass of amaretto and I went out, and I might have had a second cigarette because I was so shaken by that. Like, what the hell was that? And then I started thinking about, like, well, high school. Geez, high school teacher. Like, I kind of, I actually might know enough right now about different, like, I went to law school, I had a PhD in communication, I had a master's in kinesiology. It was like, I know a lot of different things by now. Like, I could be a high school teacher, right? If it's not, the knowledge problem was not the problem. So it was like, geez, that's weird. Within a month and a half or 2 months, I had sold my boat, gotten rid of most of my stuff, and moved out to, that was in Florida. I moved out to California, and where the remainder of my family, some of the remainder of my families that I care about was. And I was committed. I was going to take the first job I could find. So I immediately, I got what was called an emergency substitute teacher credential, because there was a shortage of teachers at the time. And I was going to substitute teach. I was like, and then I was going to apply for jobs, and I would take the first job I came along, and I put my resume out everywhere, and I was substitute teaching, which was, a saga of its own.
Please tell me, how was that? Just walking into a classroom for the first time, knowing, well, now I have the role of the teacher, and you had to face what? Teenagers, children?
A shy person walking into a school, like, and being a substitute teacher. I mean, that's like putting a target on your back. I remember the first day, the very first assignment was at a middle school in the San Fernando Valley. I think it was Mount Olive Middle School. And I discovered when I got to the school that the reason the woman was out was because one of her students had stabbed her in the back the day before. So it was a rough place, a lot of gangs, and at least at the time. And the kids were, both wild and fun and eager. And so I would, that was 2 days there before they found somebody who was not an emergency sub. And then I went to a different school, and then I went to a different school. My first day being assigned at a high school was for a science teacher. And it might have been excuse me, it might have been the first class. I'm going to say things as if we know each other. So I'm in this classroom, and it's rowdy. There must be between 40 and 50 kids in the class. It was a mixed, mostly Black and Latino, a couple of white kids, and clearly a rough neighborhood, rough crowd. And it is often the case that, at least it was back then, that although the teacher is supposed to leave a lesson plan, rarely did that happen. But this teacher did. So here I was, I'm walking into this circus with like 45 kids in it, big kids, 10th graders, probably 10th graders. And I'm trying, so I settle them down, okay, settle down. It's like, Miss or Mr. So-and-so, so take out your books and open up to page whatever. And this voice says, not the voice that I heard on the boat, a voice from out there said, "I'll open up my pussy." And I was like, what? Everybody laughs. And I was like, what? I said, "I'll open up my pussy." And I was like, so I remember saying, well, that's not the lesson we had in mind, but okay. And of course, everybody cracked up. And suddenly I was cool. And then it was clear we weren't going to go through the stuff on page 45 or whatever it was. I said, okay, look, I'll make a deal with you. We can talk about anything you want to talk about, anything, as long as everybody stays in the room and we're all talking about the same thing. So we stay focused on whatever we're talking about and nobody leaves. Okay. So of course, the first thing they want to talk about is sex because they're teenagers, and had a great time because I think they were so used to adults not necessarily listening to them and taking them seriously and being willing to have a conversation and being willing to say, no, that's not right. No, you get that wrong, whatever. Or like, so it was at that point where I knew, okay, this is going to work. This is going to work. And so I put my resume out and I wanted to get a job in a public school, but I was committed. I was going to take the first full-time job offered. And a friend of mine had given my resume to somebody he knew who was the head of a school called Crossroads School, which is a very well-known in Southern California school. And whatever, one thing led to the next, they offered me a job for the next year. And so I said yes, because it was the first job offer I got. And it was great in that it was very free. It was festive, right? They had a bunch of resources, so they weren't, wasn't struggling for supplies or anything like that. It was also really peculiar because it was, at the time, it was, first of all, it was an independent school, a private school, which meant people paid a lot of money. And that means they were mostly from families that had a lot of money. And it just so happened, Crossroads was kind of the darling of many of the sort of liberal, left-leaning Hollywood crowd. So I had, actors and directors and producers' kids in my classes. And I remember this experience was, it was both super fun to be there and at the same time kind of surreal because two experiences. One was, the one that was jarring was, so I get to school early because I could wake up early. So I got to school early and I'm crossing the street from the parking lot to where my office is. And this car's coming, car's coming down the road. And it's one of my students and he is driving a brand new, beautiful Mercedes-Benz convertible sports car looking thing. And it was just one of those, like, I don't know if you like, I don't know what the color is called, but it was like a white, off white. I mean, you wanted to eat the car. It was delicious. I mean, it just was like, that is beautiful. So I said to him, I said, that is a beautiful car. Oh my God. And he's, yeah, isn't it great? I just turned 16. My parents got it for me. And it was like, wow. And, in the back of I said, great. But in my mind, I'm like, wow, and that's your first car. What's your second car? Right. So it was a peculiar environment where there's nothing wrong in my world with wealth and with people who come from wealth. But sometimes when too much of that is in one place, it kind of bred this mentality. I called it the fire the maid mentality. Oh, my homework's not in my backpack. Someone fire the maid. like, wait, it's your job. It's not her job. So it was a really peculiar place. Well, fast forward. So the head of the school, this fellow, Paul Cummins, he and I had sort of gotten into the habit of periodically going to lunch, and talking about this, want to try that. And it's like, oh yeah, you should try that, whatever. And one day we finished lunch, we were walking up the back stairs into the offices before class. And I said, I looked out into where everybody hung out, the kids. I said, this is a great place. He said, yeah, but it's really not what I had in mind. It just turned out that way. So fast forward, one thing led to the next, to the next, to the next. And he tried to start a joint public-private school, which did not work because the teachers unions and, whatever, it just wasn't going to happen. And we went to lunch, which was our habit. And he said, remember that thing I was trying to, like, maybe we could do it privately, just all privately. If we had these people pay tuition and these people not. And to his credit, he put a group together, a board, nonprofit board. And he said, remember that school we were talking about? I said, yeah. He said, well, you want to try it? And he said, we're doing a search for the director. And I said, okay, well, search, that means search means nothing, right? A search means they're going to say no because they're going to hire somebody who knows what they're doing. And either the devil is better than the devil you don't, or nobody else wanted the job because it was impossible to pull off because he didn't have nearly enough money. But we started this school. And so he and I co-founded this school, and we rented the Santa Monica Boys and Girls Club, which prior to that time, sitting empty during the day, and it turns into a Boys and Girls Club after school, and started New Road School. And the idea of changing things, it wasn't so much changing things. It was just clear to me. It wasn't a decision I made. It was, how do I relate to these people? I take them seriously. So the very first day of the school, I'll never forget it. We're in the Boys and Girls Club, it's working, right? Kids have gone off to classes and it's small. It's like 70 kids total, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, where you went to school there, right? You went to school there for that year. And this student, oh no, it's lunchtime. And in walks a pizza delivery guy. And he said, looks around, he goes, I have a pizza delivery. And I said, no, this is school. It's not. Let's say for the Boys and Girls Club. No, it's for Noah Sloan. It's like, wait, Noah Sloan. It was the first day of school. It's like, I knew that name. Wait. And this little kid, he says, yeah, it's mine. I said, you ordered pizza? He said, yeah. It's like, what? And I watched myself go, no, Absolute, no way. Absolutely not. And this little kid looked up at me and said, "Whoa." Oh, he was scared and whatever. Like I was suddenly the head of the school was mad. And he said, "Well, why not?" And I quickly scrolled through my mind. It's like, well, stranger walks it. I want to keep strangers. Well, strangers come to the Boys and Girls Club all the time. Like what? So I scroll through this thing. It's a pizza place, and it's not like they're going to poison people. It's like, I said, Noah, I don't know why not. And until I do, you can have pizza. You can order pizza for lunch. But here's the rules. If it's late, that's on you, not us, right? You can't be late to your next class. And something else, whatever. You got to clean up after yourself, something like that, whatever. And so from day one, it was, so from day one, it was you could order out for food for lunch, and school needed to make sense. And the head of school didn't always make sense, and when he did, he's like, "Okay, you guys are right. I was wrong. Okay, good. We've solved that. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes I'm right." And so all sorts of decisions were made based on what makes sense. So a kid took a class, 7th grader, but I had this math at my old school. So like, I've already done this. Oh, well, we need to be able to put you in the next math class because school needs to make sense, because we're stealing your life, right? We're taking an enormous chunk of what would be otherwise a day of something enjoyable, and we're taking it from you to do something, and that something needs to be worthwhile. And so taking the same math class that you knew already didn't seem worthwhile way to spend your day. So we, the grown-ups, have to figure out how to make it so we can make it work for you and for you and for you and for you. And the joke at the school, not so much a joke, but sometimes frustration of the teachers was like, "Oh, that's another one of David's special deals." And I was like, well, yeah, I wish I could do why shouldn't everybody have a special deal? Because everybody's unique. Like I feel bad that most people are doing the same thing, even though they're different people. So let's give them the freedom to do the things that allow them to be who they are or who they might want to be. So that's just the way it emerged. It wasn't like I had an educational theory that I was going to implement. It was I had a notion that, because it was, I mean, we don't like to think about it that way, but like, school's not always a good deal for kids. It's a big chunk of life. Well, and it's even worse, right? Like for most people, not everybody, but most people, grown-ups, they go off to work, they spend their day working at stuff, whatever. Then they come home and they have their life. The kids, they go off to work, called school, and they do all their stuff, and their minds melt because it's hard to go from a math class to an English class to a English class, whatever. And then they go home, and then they have more work called homework. It's like, this is not a good deal. So this stuff better be worthwhile, because we are taking away time with their family, taking away time with their friends. So let's make this good. Let's make this fun. Let's make it learn something you have to learn from, of course, because it's school, because you do have to learn a bunch of stuff, because the world is complicated and you got to like get ready for it. But we're going to make it juicy and as fun and as juicy and as rich and as saturated with questions and puzzles and as we possibly can, because we're taking your life from you. So good, let's do this. And that was, if there was a philosophy of the school, it was that. So
Yeah, you're taking me right back to that time, David, because I was the 12-year-old that was thrown into the school coming from this very strict school system that was no fun. It was like you could smell the fear in the air of all these kids. And then suddenly I go to the school and there's teachers that listen to you and that take you seriously, and they looked at us like full on people. I remember a math class, there were sofas in the class. I couldn't believe that there would be even a comfortable furniture. Because school was not supposed to be comfortable where I came from. And then there was this kid, and he had to take medicine. And so he explained to the teacher on the first day of math class, he said, look, I gotta lie down on the sofa because I get tired from the medicine that I have to take. And so that kid could always have the sofa, but the rest of the class just accepted it. And it was even that scene for me was an eye opener. So it was, yeah, I was there for a year and it shaped my entire life. And it's something about, we talked about it in the other conversation, this thing of being taken seriously. Just hearing you say it has to be worthwhile for the child gives the child so much respect for its time. It takes the child's time seriously. Oh, we always think, oh, they're just playing, it's not important for the world, but it's not true. So yeah, it's great. How did you choose the teachers? Because you needed to find
That was hard.
ambassadors for your idea and for your spirit and vision.
Yeah.
How was that process?
It was usually very time consuming because you interview a lot of people, you meet a lot of people, and then you watch them teach. You give them a demo, a class to demonstrate, and then you throw the dart at the dartboard and hope you got a bullseye. And sometimes you did and sometimes you didn't. And you got a sense, pretty quickly, does this person relate well to young people? Is this person dealing with people or do they need to stand on high on a pedestal? And I will say, that changed somewhat over the years in terms of, one size doesn't fit all. One size never fits all. So some of the really great teachers that I've known and that I've hired and worked with, they taught in really conventional ways, some of them, and but they were really good at it, right? I mean, they were really engaging, and you knew they always cared about the kids. That mattered most of all. But some people were really good at creating situations for young people to discover in, and other people lectured. And I had a bias against that at first until I watched people do it really well. I was like, oh, hey, live and learn, right? Like, it's like, and one size never fits all. So this person's just really great doing this thing, which, I think they could do it, quote, better in a different way, but maybe not. And here they were being fabulous at this thing and inspiring kids with just the sheer weight of what they knew about biology or what they knew about physics or whatever it was. And so, did they teach in a way that I would have encouraged them to learn? No, but boy, were they good at what they were doing. So there. And yeah, a lot of, and then sometimes it's, as students, as kids get older, as the grades get more sort of more conventionally subject driven, an algebra 2 class needs to teach these things, and somebody needs to leave a chemistry class knowing these kinds of things, and it required a certain sort of specialized knowledge from a teacher. And boy, trying to find, there's no shortage of teachers, but shortage of great teachers who happen to teach chemistry, who happen to also like kids and enjoy having fun with kids. And like, boy, that's sometimes a tall order. So there were times where, you know, there were times when I held my nose and hired a teacher, and usually I was right about the holding my nose part, because they were not what we wanted. They were not what we wanted. They were not what the kids wanted. And so, you know, you don't know enough about baseball, but in America, where there is baseball, there's an expression. It's like, well, a person's batting average, right? Well, you never bat 1,000, which means every time you get up to bat, you hit. Like, no. So sometimes I struck out.
Did you have one teacher or one guide in your life that was most important, that was really important, one of those figures?
You mean for me?
For you, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a few come to mind. The one,
Tell me about one or two.
yeah, the one that always immediately comes to mind, a woman named, well, when I first was in her English class, her name was Mrs. Posadi. And then the next year, when I came back to school, her name was Mrs. Toms. And so over that summer, there was a divorce and a remarriage. So I don't know the details of how all that happened, but, and sadly, and I kept in touch with her. She was a high school teacher. I kept in touch with her for several years. And sadly, she, almost as quickly as her name changed, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor and then died at a pretty young age. But I wasn't much of an English student, because I first of all, I was dyslexic, but also, so I didn't like reading, and I didn't like, I wasn't drawn to sort of finding the symbolism in this book or that book or whatever, which always seemed to be what it was English teachers wanted you to do. But I loved her because she appreciated young people and she appreciated ideas, and she clearly loved what she was doing. She loved what she was doing. She would almost sing. She didn't, but she would almost sing her words. Oh, David, how are you today? She was Greek. She was Greek. And so I just thought she was delightful. And she wrestled with big ideas, right? I mean, the books, she wanted us to wrestle with big ideas. And she somehow trusted that we could. So, and again, it was during those years of Vietnam War protests. So there were big ideas flying around in the environment, right? Big ideas about war and peace and love. And can you have and is it ever okay to kill? And is it ever okay to be in a war? And really wrestling with significant questions and significant questions at a time where young people were, in the next year or two, that might be you who is going to have to make a choice about being in this, am I going to go into a combat situation? Am I going to leave the country? Am I going to avoid the draft? I mean, it was so real and palpable for all of us, right? I mean, it was the world we were living in, and it was life and death, and it was our life and death. It was not abstract or friends of ours or older brothers and sisters. So, and she somehow managed to get us to grapple with those things, to wrestle with significant questions. So, and it was within at least in her class, it was within a culture of tolerance, right? Of embracing as many points of view as could be embraced. So maybe she was exactly the influence that helped. I'm choking up as I'm thinking about her right now. So if you, there's definitely a tear or two there. So yeah.
It's wonderful how only a short acquaintance, a short time with somebody can
Yes.
move so much in a person's life.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
which
You
you
bet.
did for me,
Hmm.
which you did for me, and for many others. And I
Hmm.
think that's so beautiful to work with young children, and they become adults, and you've watched a few of them become adults. And how is that? There must be a few that you remember or that you felt very connected to, and must be gorgeous to watch all these people spread out and do whatever they're doing. How is
Uh,
your connection with your former pupils?
isn't that funny? Um, this is an overstatement, but when you said there must be a few you remember, and it's like I, I remember almost all of them. Now that's not entirely true, but mostly true. Doesn't mean I loved almost all of them or that all of them left as much of a mark on me, but like you left a mark on me, even though we barely saw one another then. But I just remember the, the sense of thrill that you had, thrilled to be, and that really left a mark. But well, let's see. One of my good friends now, I think he's a good friend, um, was a former student, not at New Roads, but at Crossroads, that school I worked at just before. Um, he was from Israel. He was the Israel. He had just been the Israeli national skateboard champion when he came to the school, and he didn't have a lot of money. It wasn't from a family like that. um, he was put in my class. He came to school late and he was put in my class. I think because he was being such a pain in the ass, and his other class, he was put in my class as a 10th grader. I was teaching a class of seniors, and he never did any work. He never handed anything in, never. But he was always participate in a conversation. And never, and I would just like adore. His name was Adore. Still is Adore. I said, Adore, you're gonna ever give me that stuff? Like I can't, you're gonna fail this class. It's insane. They're like, and literally the last day of school, he hands me a stack of all of the papers that he didn't do the entire, I guess it was a semester. And I thought, oh, pain in the ass. This kid's such a pain in the ass. And I started to read it. And I thought, I remember I remember that feeling of like, okay, I could find reasons to, quote, take points off of what he wrote, but it was so good. It was so insightful and well done. And I was like, that's amazing, amazing. So he took my class the next semester, and I gave him a C, and he protested. I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And like, I wasn't supposed to accept any of that. Anyway, he he's still significantly in my life. He's probably some combination of a student, a teacher, a brother, a father, a son. It's like he's really a wonderful guy. Um, but there was, there's so many kids that I still have contact with. That like one of the people who was on the marketing team for Curiosity Invited is a former student who knows that world. Like, well, that's good because I don't know that world. So terrific. So I love the students. I loved hanging out with the students. I mean, I know that my colleagues at other schools and frequently members of the board of New Roads uh, thought I should be spending a lot more time fundraising than being with students or teaching in class or 2 or 3. And I would periodically tell them, I would say, look, this, you could think of it this way. First of all, I said, working at a school without being around the students is got to be the stupidest thing in the world. Like, I could get a job and make lots of money just doing stuff I don't want to do. So why? I'm around a school. It's the only good thing about schools is the kids. So, but I also would say, like, this is fundraising. Like, at some point, I'm going to have dinner with that person's parents and ask them for money. And they know, and they will know how well I know their child. And so when they write that check, they're going to write a bigger check because I know their kid and what their kid needs and what their kid likes. So this is fundraising. So that was not, my colleagues didn't feel that way. So, yeah. Talking a lot about school.
Yes, we are. I have a question. It's been burning. I wanted to ask in the beginning, when you were when you were a teenager or a child, was there a grown up, be it somebody you knew or a celebrity or another important public figure that you saw and you thought, this is the man I want to be? Did you have a sense of who you wanted to become later on?
That's a really great question. I don't think so. I think the closest, different people had different characteristics. So 2 things come to mind. But it's mostly what people said. Like, I remember getting a very specific instruction from my father. And it was, look, it's important to listen to everybody, but then make up your own mind. And I think he meant that. He just didn't mean for me to apply it to things he said. So, you know, I remember one time we were driving, we're going out to eat, and we're in the car, and I think there was a war between Israel and the Middle East, and Egypt, and I'm trying to remember who was involved, but the Palestinian situation, and my father said, it's important to hate the Arabs. And I said, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I don't even know an Arab, right? I was a teenager by then. And he was so pissed off at me. And it's like, but it didn't make sense. It's like, why would I hate people I've never had any experiences with? Well, because they hate you. It's like, well, who hates me? Like, and just because they hate me doesn't mean I have to hate them. And he was so pissed. And at the same time, I remember also reminding him that I was supposed to listen to everybody and make up my own mind. And he got super pissed off at that as well. So, but I knew I didn't want to grow up to be like him. But that lesson stood out because it felt, as soon as he said it, it's like, oh yeah, right. And the other thing and I didn't want to be like my uncle either, his brother actually. But one time, and I think I was in law school, or I was certainly older. He used to work for, at the time he was an engineer, he's a physicist, was a physicist for General Electric. And he was in charge of some large department, which I don't remember what it was. And then months later, when we saw, because we didn't live near each other, he was no longer in charge of that department. It was clear from the conversation among the adults, he was demoted, right? He was somehow lower on the totem pole. And at some point when it was just he and I said, what happened? Why did you? And he said, I was working in the department that develops weapons. And the weapon they wanted me to develop was just so horrible. It just was so horrible what it was going to do that I just told them, take me off. Even if it doesn't matter, just take me off. I can't do this. And tears came to his eyes. And he was a paratrooper during World War II. He dropped behind enemy lines. And I mean, he was a man's man, and, was in wars and was doing all sorts of special forces things. And so this was not a shy and retiring and warm and fuzzy person, but to see the tears and the tenderness that was there about this thing that was going to do horrible things to people, it was so meaningful that but I don't think there was ever a person who I somehow wanted to end up like. There were certainly characteristics of people that I wanted to emulate and that I admired, but it never was the whole never was the whole package. Maybe it was like, you have to make up your own mind. So yeah.
Did you have a plan, or did you surf through life? Did everything just come to you and happen?
That's the perfect question, because I never had a plan. I did the next thing that seemed interesting. That like, oh, this is reward, or I would do something and find something rewarding in it and then chase that. There was never, I didn't end up, so, I went to college. I must have been so many different majors. And at some point I could never decide. And at some point I realized, oh, wait, I can change my major. It's not like it is anymore. We have to apply for a major, et cetera, et cetera. I just had to write it on a piece of paper. I could change my major to get into a class. right? You can only take this class if you're a so-and-so philosophy major, or if you're a science major, or if you're so I was like, just change my major. And then when you actually had to finally have a major, it was like, oh shit, what am I gonna, I don't know. So I found the major that required the fewest things, the things that I had mostly already completed. And that was my major. So it was social science interdisciplinary. And then I got a master's in kinesiology. But because I was interested in physiology and biomechanics and those kinds of things in bodies, and then I went to law school. I went to law school because I couldn't figure out what else to do, and I didn't have the courage to just go out into the world and do whatever the next thing was. School was always rewarding, so I did that, and then I didn't want to pay for it. So I knew by then that if I had gotten accepted into an academic department as well as the law school, they would pay for my law school tuition. So I did that, and I had no intention of getting the PhD, but suddenly was interested in some of the things I was learning. So I stayed to do that. So, and, you know, the teaching thing happened because some voice said, you could teach high school. I was like, what? And you know, somebody said, would you think about running the school where it was like not just people who paid tuition, but people who couldn't afford it as well, right? New Roads was that combination of, it's like, yeah, sure, I would do that. But it wasn't because I decided I wanted to be a head of a school. It was like, so my entire quote career, a career is what somebody looks back on and says, oh, that's your career back there. It was never forward looking. I've always been a little stupid about that. I just, yeah, they're just, it's, you know, maybe that's the downside of curiosity. There's so many things to get interested in, right? There was years ago, there was an animated film. You can still find it, made by Harry Nilsson. Harry Nilsson was a singer, songwriter. You can, I think sometimes his songs appear on commercials these days, but he wrote an animated film called The Point. And it was about this kid who was born with a point on his head or no point on his head, or I don't even remember. And he got banished because he didn't have a point. And then he went into the pointed forest and met this whatever. And this one character had this line that's like, well, remember, a point in every direction is the same as no point at all, which is mathematically true. And so maybe that's true. Maybe no point at all, which maybe the first question you asked, what is this podcast? Maybe there's no point at all other than exploration. And wow, people are incredibly interesting, doing really interesting things and fascinating. Yeah, it's amazing. And look at you, you're a filmmaker. Look at you. And are you ever going to teach kids?
Well, I hope so. I hope when I feel old enough, mature enough to do it. I still have to make all the mistakes first.
Yeah.
I still have to fail all the time in order to be a good teacher later. I hope. I hope. And we could end it there, but I still want to know a few things, David.
Okay, well, just let me just say, I have at 11 o'clock, I have another phone call I have to be on, but
okay.
Oh wait, 11 o'clock, which means 7 o'clock your world, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So I wanted to know, did you have like a high time in your life? There's the thing saying the best time of my life. Is there a phase that you look back onto that you think, wow, that was incredible? Or is that time now in Wyoming?
Are you asking about, did you say high time or hard time?
No, high time.
High time.
Yes.
Well, I'm always hopeful that tomorrow is better than today. Wow, that's a hard question. Um, I loved, in hindsight, I loved being at the school, being at New Roads. I also hated it. It was so, especially at the beginning, it was so hard. It was so relentless. We didn't have enough staff to do all the things because I couldn't afford it, to do all the things that had to get done in order just to keep things going. And so it was, I mean, just so much work. And so uh, I was in a position where it's people's kids. So when things are not going well for the kids, there's that inclination that like it must be you. You're the reason. And so people would hate things about me. And even if there wasn't about me. And but there was something unbelievably thrilling about the school. Maybe and I think it was because the kids were so I just, somehow I understand. I've had that experience early on teaching high school where I walked into the room for the first time and just had that sense is like, oh, I get this. I get what's happening here. I understand. So there was something about being around people that age, which is, they're they're developed enough to be interested adults, and at the same time, they haven't made up their minds yet. So there's so much that they're still willing to consider and think about and be curious. There it is again. Be curious about. And so that was really spectacular. I would say a lot of the times when I was teaching at UC Santa Cruz was in the class, not being at the university, the university, whatever. Um, but being in a classroom with people thinking about things and watching on their face as the ideas sort of as they discover things is a really thrilling. It still is. It's still some of the most. I mean, I've had some. I used to say this to some of my friends who I've had some real adventures in my life. Like, I've been in storms on boats. I've been, boarded by pirates. I mean, like I've had real adventures. Like some of them I won't talk about, right? It's like, but and some of the most thrilling times of my life were in whatever counts as a classroom where ideas are flying around and people are making connections that they've never made before or that I've never made before. And so that's some of my most exciting moments were in what is, to people who don't teach, an incredibly boring environment. School. It's like, really? How can that be? But it's really true. So I'm not sure. I mean, they were sprinkled around my life. I mean, I to this day, if somebody is drawn to teaching, I encourage them. It's like, because it's phenomenal. It's really, and it's phenomenal. And I feel like it, all the more it's important. And it's probably more important as the world gets more siloed and more black and white and more people opposed to each other, is that the solution, there's probably lots of them, but one of them has to be people's creating a situation where people's minds are open to something other than what they believe firmly, like, no, the world is this way. These are the best. This is the way it ought to be. It's those people over there. If people, education is one of those ways in which some of that, if we're lucky, if we're good and we're lucky, where some of that rigid structure starts to some of the sharp edges and hard lines soften, and then people can see what's beautiful and lovable in somebody else, or just like me, or geez, I had a similar experience. If I had a similar experience, maybe there is a point of connection between me and that asshole over there. So I think education, offers that possibility, and anybody who's drawn to it is, yes, more. So,
David, one last question.
yeah,
Give us a song. Give us a song.
give us a song.
Yes, a song that you love.
You know why here's why I'm chuckling. One, I'd never sing in front of people.
No, not sing, but like
No.
We should listen to a song that.
But here, wait. But let me tell you. So, and of course, I have, but and this morning my wife said, "So, are you going to sing in your podcast?" And I said, "No, but it's so wild that that's the last." Give us a song. So a song.
Maybe you should sing.
No. I did they gave me an honoring retirement fundraiser. It was a big fundraiser at the school when I left. And as part of it, people were singing. And unbeknownst to anybody except me and the music teacher, Michael Abels, who's I did a podcast with, I sang for 2,000 people. It was amazing. So it was an amazing experience.
What did you sing?
What did I sing? It was a Leon Russell song from back in the day. A song that is so interesting. I'm not sure there's any song that inspires me, but there certainly are singers who inspire the hell out of me. So it probably would be blues. It would be a blues song. And it might be Aretha Franklin. It might be Stevie Ray Vaughan, guitarist, blues singer. But the first thing that came to mind when you asked that was there was this bar band. I don't know what they're playing when I was living in Miami on a boat. The group was called Little Nicky and the Slicks, and she did a cover of a blues song, and it was something like, "Since I met you, baby, my whole life has changed." And I loved that song. I loved hearing her sing that song, Little Nicky and the Slicks. God, I haven't thought of that in years. So there are people. Oh, let me tell you this last thing. So my life changed in a big way when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I think I was 5, but it might have been 6. I'm in the back seat of the car. My mom and my dad are in the front. We're coming home from someplace. My brother and I are in the back seat. I'm tired. we're in traffic. And so I'm just resting my head on the ledge, looking out at the cars going by, and some, nobody's going by quickly because we're in traffic. So it's like, what? And I'm kind of thinking about, we're coming back from my grandparents. I remember this so vividly. We're coming back from my grandparents, and I was thinking about my grandmother and my grandfather and school and the people in school and my friend Larry and the cars are just going by, and then this one car goes by and slows down, and I'm just looking out, and I meet the eyes of this girl who has got her head resting on the ledge of her, just looking out like this, and we caught eyes, and I suddenly had this feeling of like, I remember turning to my parents and saying, life is so big. Because in my mind, I realized this person who was doing this, quote, same thing, well, maybe she's got grandparents and friends and a whole life and everything. And I knew my life was there was so much in it. And her life, there's probably so much in it. And that means everybody's life, there's so much in it. It's like, oh my God, the world is so big. And I turned to my mom and and said that life is, and it changed my life. It absolutely changed my life. Like, oh my God, there's so much in, like, because it's not just, it's big enough with just the physical stuff, but then there's all this other stuff that everybody's got, and it's all different and it's all unique, and wow, what a world. So
What was the name of the song you said? Baby.
Since I met you, baby, my whole life has changed.
So let's dedicate that to the girl in the car.
Okay, absolutely. That's true, because since I met her, which I never did, my whole life has changed. Although I don't know if I ever did. Maybe I did. I may have married her for all I know. Oh, hey, I wish I didn't have to go. I love speaking to you.
I always love speaking to you, David. Thanks for this amazing conversation.
Oh, thank you.
Sharing.
What are you doing this evening? Because where
I'm
you are, it's evening.
gonna go and eat.
Good.
I got chicken in the oven.